Welcome to Know the Word, Live the Word. This is Chris Bender with TLC, and you are looking at a freeze frame of a video of my beautiful wife Paula and our son Caleb. Now, I'm recording this in 2021, so this is about 20 years ago when our son was a little over a year old. And before we watch this clip, I do want to mention at the very end of this video, there'll also be a clip of Caleb about 5 months before this time. But I want you to focus in on this and take note of how he's trying to get Paula's attention with a little bit of humor. So look at him, don't look at me. And I get a crack up about as much as his laughter is about as much as I get a crack up from the noises that he's making in between the laughter as he's breathing heavily and just looking forward to making her laugh again, which kind of really drives us into the topic of this video. The question is, when it comes to laughter, when it comes to joy, when it comes to anger, pain, frustration, love, it's all by chance? Is it just an accidental process of evolution, or is there something else going on? Now, there's a lot of smart folks that would say, yeah, it's by chance. It's an accidental process. And there's a lot of smart folks that would disagree and say, no, there's something deeper going on here. Let's first look from the evolutionary perspective, and let's look at one of the leading atheists, Richard Dawkins, and what he has to say about just the universe in general. So he says here, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Now let me just stop there for a second and say, this is not where all atheists are coming from. It's definitely not. However, I will give him this. I will say that if we are the products of accidental processes, or just by chance things came together, then there is a lot of truth to what he's saying, because at the end of the day, anything that we would call good or evil really would be reduced to what would be considered preference. Because if this is all an accidental process, then there really is no evil, no good. There's just what we interpret as those things. Now, it's interesting when you look at some of the other interviews and comments that Dawkins has had over the years. It's not surprising that he's commented on multiple occasions that he thinks mild pedophilia is not a big deal. And of course, again, if it's all by random processes and chance, then he's probably right. Now, let's continue down that path of evolution. Look at the beginning and say, all right, so if it's pitiless indifference that we're looking at, let's see what we're talking about. So first, there's the Big Bang. Now, this is something over the past a little over 100 years that both atheistic and creation scientists agree upon. And most of them indicate that things took place over the course of a long period of time. Certainly not all scientists come from that perspective. There are several that think the Earth is much younger than we think it is. But by and large, the majority say, oh, okay, this has taken place over long periods of time and developed into all that we can now see, hear, feel. But that's not where it ends. If we talk about the evolutionary process, let's look a little deeper. So how about Michael Shermer? He's the founder of Skeptic Magazine, and in his magazine, he has Bill Nye writing an article giving tribute to the late Carl Sagan, who was also very much involved in the idea of the cosmos and where things came from and whatnot. And I find it interesting, Bill Nye's comment in that article that we won the cosmic lottery. And I also heard an interview with Lee Strobel and Michael Shermer that Michael Shermer said that again. It's like, we won the cosmic lottery. So what does he mean by that? Well, what he means by that, and just a few things to be aware of, is when it comes to our Earth and the fact that we have life here, if our orbit was slightly different in one way or another, we either freeze to death or we'd burn to death. And when it comes to gravity, when it comes to the moon, if we just adjust that by a little bit one way or another, life couldn't exist then. And so take a guess at what would happen if our Earth was spinning a little slower, a little faster. Yeah, we would all die. And so those are just a few things, but when you dive into this issue deeper, you find that there's a whole host of things that have to happen exactly the way they do, or life doesn't exist. So if it's by chance, then I would have to agree with Michael Shermer that we have won the cosmic lottery. Now, when it comes to human process, when it comes to all that we see around us, not just humans, but animals and plants and those types of things, over a period of time, they've all developed into very complex beings. And I find it interesting that when we look at some of the ways we've been designed, for example, if I go put my hand on a burning stove, I'm going to take it off right away unless I've got leprosy and I no longer have nerves. So we find that as a very interesting thing, that evolution thought it was appropriate that we would have nerves to let us know, hey, something's wrong here. Or how about the process of perpetuating our species? Isn't it interesting that the process of procreation is pleasurable? It seems much more than chance that is the case, that our race of people and all of the animals don't just suddenly disappear, because there's a reason they want to continue to procreate. And when it comes to food, you ever find it interesting that it's just by chance that there's all kinds of things that we like to eat? Yes, there's things we don't like to eat as well, but there's things that we do like to eat. In that process, we get those hunger pains, and then we eat. And for a lot of us, most of us, it's a pleasurable process to eat. And so we don't die of starvation. Is that all by chance? Now, I say when we look at that and the fine-tuning of everything around us, I say when it comes to faith, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That's really taken from the book that Norman Geisler and Frank Turk wrote. And it's an interesting, pretty quick read that gets into a lot of those details. So let's jump a little further. So if there's no design, no purpose, isn't it interesting that not more than 150 years ago, the community of scientists really were coming from the place that the universe has always been. It didn't have a starting point. So they looked at the Jews and the Christians as being morons with this idea that there was a start to the process. Well, nowadays, you can't find a respectable atheist. Well, you can't find many of them who are scientists who don't recognize a starting point of the universe and that it is expanding now. And how about with regards to all these organs? Back in the late 19th century, they looked at the organs that we had and said, gosh, we've got almost 200 organs that are useless. Doesn't this prove that it's an evolutionary process and we're outgrowing the things that we were basically evolved with? Well, the problem is over the past little over a century, that 180 got reduced down to 0. So just because of these things, that doesn't prove that the Bible is correct. In fact, Enlightenment, when it came forward so many hundreds of years ago, they really started looking at the Bible and saying, this is a ridiculous book that's been made up, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why. First of all, there's the idea of Jesus. It's just a legend. There's really not historical proof to even demonstrate that he has lived, let alone died and resurrected. And how about King David? All kinds of psalms are reportedly written by him, and there's all this history around David in the Bible. It's just a myth. And then when it came to Belshazzar, who was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar in the Babylonian Empire, folks looked at this and said, there's no record of this guy. Of course, there's a record of Nebuchadnezzar. There's a record of this guy called Nabonidus, but Belshazzar, he doesn't even exist. So clearly Daniel, who wrote this, was just making it up. And then when it comes to the Hittites, it's not a real people. There's not even a civilization there. The Bible's just making this stuff up because they've got to create an interesting story so that people will be drawn in. And then when you look at the book of Acts, there were titles and places and people that were spoken of that the Enlightenment era looked at and said, this guy's making up as much stuff as the people in the Old Testament did. There's just not truth here. And finally, looking at the Old Testament, he said, look at the time period. So many hundreds of years ago, we cannot trust what we're reading. It must have been copied so poorly. We just can't trust what's there. So as time went on, what do they now conclude? What discoveries have been made? Well, I don't care whether they're atheists or they're coming from a Christian perspective. Pretty much everyone who has any level of historicity in their background, they look at and say, yeah, Jesus is a real person. Yeah, and there seems to be a whole lot of proof that he died on the cross. No, they're not willing to make the jump that he's resurrected, but they do recognize that he lived and he died from a Roman crucifixion. And David, not only did they discover that, yes, he in fact did, but the tells that they uncovered through archaeology also demonstrated his kingship, his house of royalty. And then when it came to Belshazzar, one of the digs that they had found that Nabonidus, who was Belshazzar's father, actually was called by his father to rule in his absence when he was away. So once again demonstrated that what Daniel had written was absolutely correct. And when it came to the Hittites, written throughout the Old Testament, they determined that not only was there information about the people, but there was information about their civilization. So again, discovery proved the Bible to be correct. How about the book of Acts? Now, Sir William Ramsay, who looked at the information that Luke put together really in the early part of the 20th century, once we'd discovered so many things, including the titles and names and places, he came to the conclusion that there were 32 countries, 54 cities, 9 Mediterranean islands, and 95 people. And he got them all right. So that in and of itself demonstrates how careful Luke was as a historian of the Old Testament. And finally, you remember a little discovery back in the late 1940s of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Kids out in the desert area and ends up hearing a broken piece of pottery and discovers all kinds of information from the Essenes, the people that lived during the same time as the Pharisees and the Sadducees during that very early part. It's about the dating of that material brings them back to about 100 BC. Guess what? As soon as they found these things, guess what the atheists were thinking? Oh boy, once they uncover this and once they lay out the breakdown of the scriptures, they're going to see how poorly all of the Bibles have been translated since that time. What did they end up finding out? Well, copies of information that were included in the Essenes' writings included the entire book of Isaiah, a long book in the Old Testament, and it included pieces from virtually every other book in the Old Testament. And other than some prepositions and a couple other minor changes, no major theological ideas of Christianity and Judaism were affected in the discoveries. In fact, they found with incredible accuracy that the modern day Bibles that we have are right in tune with what they had written back then, 100 years before Christ. So when you are pursuing the idea of whether we're here by chance or whether there's something more, don't leave your mind behind. Reason is very much a part of this pursuit. And I recommend some great books that you can take a look at, whether you enjoy listening them audibly or reading them. Lee Strobel was an atheistic journalist who sought to basically disprove the accuracy of the Bible and the idea of Jesus Christ and his resurrection and all of that. And it ended up becoming a believer. And he wrote a whole host of books, some of which I really recommend. The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith, The Case for Miracles, The Case for Creator, all great books in your pursuit, coming from a former atheist. Case for Miracles is one of his most recent, and I found it really interesting because there's so much attack on the supernatural that it's just bogus. But there's some irrefutable evidence in that book that is worth looking at. And Josh McDowell, who wrote Evidence Demands a Verdict decades ago, he and his son Seth more recently have updated and revised that book and added a whole bunch of new areas that respond to other objections around the idea of the Bible and everything about it. It's a great book, very, very long book. So if you're really wanting to be thorough in your search, great book to look at. And then, of course, the one that I showed the picture of, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, is a good one. Now, you might be thinking, Chris, at the end of the day, we think you're just trying to peddle some more Christian books so that your friends can make some money. Okay, well, if that's what you think, I also have a friend by the name of Steve Gregg, who is the founder of The Narrow Path. And The Narrow Path has all kinds, hundreds of hours of free material that you can listen to. You can stream or download MP3s. Couple that I recommend, his series on creation and evolution. It was done a few decades ago. And the one that he did on the authority of scriptures. Really, really solid stuff. So don't leave reason behind. Take the time, pursue it, look into it. If there is even a chance that any of this is true, isn't it worth finding out? Now, take a look at this next clip from Caleb as he was a couple months away from his first birthday.
And he started taking about 3 or 4 steps about 2 weeks ago. He's on the verge of walking.
Take each day, dive deeper, and I hope that as you dive deeper, as the scriptures say, if you seek him with all of your heart, you will find him. And I sure hope you do.